So seemingly out of nowhere, Nintendo releases Wave 4 and it's really good? I have my share of nitpicks we'll get into in a bit, but the tracks here in Wave 4, in terms of layouts at least, is some of the best we've seen in Mario Kart 8. Reiterating on the first thing I said though, looking back, I guess they did drop the date when they first showed off Wave 4, but there wasn't a release trailer or anything on their channel, so I didn't even know this came out until a friend of mine started talking about it in a Discord call. That aside, you know how this goes. We'll do a quick little rundown of everything in Wave 4 with some final thoughts at the end, starting with not a track, but a character. It was initially said the booster pass was going to be nothing but tracks, but they seemingly decided against this, because now we have a brand new row on the character select screen for upcoming characters. I mean, it makes sense, right? All the tracks they're putting in are just ports of models in Tour, so if they're going to port stuff over, you might as well port over some of those character models from Tour as well, especially since Mario Kart Tour has the largest character roster in the series. As of right now, we just have Birdo, which it seems a lot of people already thought was innate. She comes in 9 different colors, much like Yoshi, and is a welcome addition to the roster. People are already going crazy with their predictions, and not to be a buzzkill, but don't expect anyone that isn't already in Tour. That is, unless they do a simultaneous release with a new character for both 8 and Tour. Fortunately, Tour has a lot to take from. Diddy Kong, Nabbit, and Petey Piranha are all pretty safe bets. Petey Piranha is gonna go right there. Also, am I the only person irrationally bothered by the fact the Mii selection won't be in the bottom right corner anymore? Presumably, the space right here is going to be a character, so now the bottom row is just broken up by the Mii selection. The life of being OCD means a life of constant pain. First track, Amsterdam Drift. There are a whopping 3 maps based off real-world locations in Wave 4, which I would normally say is overkill, although fortunately they are some of the best we've seen thus far. In fact, Amsterdam Drift is probably the weakest of the 3 in Wave 4, which is saying a lot because this is still a solid map. My biggest issue is a problem I have with a lot of Tour tracks, where it feels like the pathing is an afterthought to the actual city model. You know, like they recreated a real location and then thought of the routing for each lap after the fact. It's the most apparent in the last portion of the last lap, where the routing is so unintuitive. They just plastered giant red arrows everywhere. While this time around we have some tracks that are very visually impressive, some almost contending with what's in base 8, as we'll see in a bit. Amsterdam Drift is not one of them. The colors are great, the models and textures are not. The grass already looks more like green concrete than actual grass, but then what the hell is this scene? Like seriously, what? It's one thing to look bad, but I don't even know what that is. Also, please just add a brick texture to these buildings. This is Mario Kart, not Legoland. I made this comparison in the last wave, but take a look at Toad Harbor. The actual geometry of the buildings really isn't that much more complicated, but it's that texture work that makes a world of difference. You can look cartoony and detailed. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Mario 3D World is proof of this. You got that bubbly, saturated Mario art style, but the texture work is really good there. Finally, in terms of art direction, the last bit with the flower garden is a great idea. Again, the colors are great, but that PS1 flower model is super distracting. Obviously, if you're using models, the geometry of the flower can't be too complicated when you're going to have like 800 of them, which makes me think they should have stuck with a 2D texture if they wanted to populate a garden with this many flowers. I'm sure a lot of people think a 2D sprite would be more distracting, but you'd be surprised how much you can get away with when just using 2D assets. So much of the greenery in most of Mario Kart 8 is 2D textures. Take this little jungle portion and Cheap Beach for example. How did they cram this much detail into a map without slowdown? Well, that's because all the detail is coming from the texture work instead of the actual model geometry. You got this overhanging greenery that looks great, but go out of your way to take a closer look and it's much more apparent that it was just a 2D texture with an alpha channel. But when you're racing fast and got so many little details everywhere, obviously you're not going to notice. What you will notice is a flower so rough you can literally count the number of vertices on it. Want to see an impressive looking map? Boom, Riverside Park. It's strange that a remake of a Game Boy Advance track of all things is one of the best, if not the best, looking booster course track. And yet, here we are. Once again, a lot of the greenery, namely these ivy-looking leaves, rely on low geometry models so rough you can count the edges, instead of high-quality 2D textures, which I personally think would have been the call. But that aside, this is a great-looking map. That skybox specifically might be one of the most gorgeous-looking skyboxes I've ever seen in a video game. Then you got this cave portion with great dim blue lighting, and a final jump out of the cave and through a waterfall. There's a clear artistic vision here, and it all comes together super well. This is a simple map, but honestly, I have a soft spot for all the reimagined 2D maps, especially when they're done this well. Also, those stubby leg piranha walkers crack me up. That walk cycle is hilarious. DK Summit. This is one of my all-time favorite tracks from Wii. Top 5 easily. Wait, didn't I do a Mario Kart Wii ranking video? Where did I put it? Okay, top 8 apparently. It's still a great map here. Nothing has really changed since Wii, and next to no changes from Tour. Visually, this track has the least number of changes from how we saw it in Tour, and that is also why DK Summit is my vote for the most underwhelming looking track in this wave. wave, which is actually saying a lot because even this looks better than all of Wave 1, most of Wave 2, and some of Wave 3. Given the output, I'm assuming the team working on the booster pass is a less experienced team. So if that is the case, then it seems they are learning and improving, which is good news to a Mario Kart 8 stan like myself. Maybe by the time we get to Wave 6, these tracks will truly rival what's seen in Base 8 on all fronts. Back to the track, it's always weird to me they don't put more detail into these cannon shot sections. I mean, you can't move whatsoever, making these purely visual segments. So the least they could have done are make those rocks not look so flat. It's bizarre too, because Wave 3's Merry Mountain had some of the most impressive looking stone textures I've seen in a Switch game, while still maintaining that angular cartoony look. Also, this is the most nitpicky shit ever, but those trees look like they're ripped straight out of VeggieTales. Tracks like DK Summit are hindered the most by having a direct comparison to a Base 8 track. In this case, that track being Mount Wario, which is another track where you race down a snowy mountain. I will say I do like the colors of DK Summit. Everything is more vibrant, but Mount Wario is absolutely breathtaking. And ultimately, maps like Mount Wario is why I'm so nitpicky about this stuff in the first place. Nintendo is making way more money now than they were nearly 10 years back, and yet the stuff they were doing on their worst selling console looks a lot better than a lot of the stuff they're doing now. And I'm the asshole, Yoshi's Island. At this point in time, this is the only booster pass course that does not appear in Tour. As many of you know, all of the tracks in the booster course are ripped directly from Tour, or made to have a near concurrent release of Tour like what we saw with Sky High Sunday, although there is supposedly internal data that suggests it was likewise made with Tour in mind, which given the lack of Mario Kart 8's iconic anti-grav and the track having mostly basic geometry, that isn't hard to believe. That being said, this is a very good track. The music is peak, the art style, while maybe simple at some parts, emulates the Yoshi's Island art style exceedingly well, and there's even a lot of small design flourishes like the coins being Yoshi coins, and the results music being the stage clear music from Yoshi's Island. A lot of the booster pass stuff has been recycling models from Base 8, but most all the enemies and other entities seen in this map are completely new. Also, shout out to this question cloud. You hit it while gliding down and it creates an alternate path in the air. Not only is that often what it does in Yoshi's Island, but that's a really cool mechanical idea. I can't say I've seen them do anything like that in Mario Kart before. My only real complaint with this map is the low poly models. Like, I know Yoshi's house is just a bed of leaves on top of some logs, but bro, that's just a rectangle of a leaf texture. Fantastic map though, and the theming is on point. Bangkok Rush. This is a great tour track. There's a surprising number of alternate routes on this one, on top of the expected gimmick of having each lap take a different route. While the mini-map is still a mess, this map feels like a race course first and a recreation of a real location second, which is how it should be. I didn't have any moments where I got completely caught off guard with a turn like I often do with some of the previous tour tracks in this booster pass. The big critique is likely what you'd expect, and that's the lack of detailed textures. We once again have mostly flat colors, and that garage portion in particular is especially drab. Like, come on, you couldn't have put some signage or graffiti in here? I thought that sort of detail looked great in Bell Subway. Hell, you could have even reused those textures for all I care. Anything's better than these flat dark green walls. But again, good map otherwise. Mario Circuit. This is an often forgotten track from DS, but it's great to see it return. The textures and lighting are much better than what we saw in, say, Toad Circuit from Wave 1. They added this forest portion of the track here, and I think that was a great idea. It looks fantastic with the darker lighting contrasted by the god rays shining through the trees, and it breaks up the otherwise predictable look of a circuit track. The biggest thing that stands out to me on this one are those spectator sprites in the bleachers. If they're gonna keep putting this same exact audience gif in every other booster pass track, and especially if they're going to make what I think is the unwise decision to put them so close to the track, the least they could do is always have the sprite facing the player, because stuff like what we saw in Wave 2 with this shit is just not acceptable. Wave 4 is leagues above that, but since the sprites are skewed alongside the bleachers, it's still a little distracting. In tracks like 8's opening Mario Circuit, someone could potentially think those are a bunch of tiny models, but when they're presented like this, it's very obvious they're a 2D sprite, which is not what you want. Sprites are great for saving memory, but when using them in a game like Mario Kart, the idea should be to hide the fact that it's merely a flat image, unless you're trying to do some Paper Mario shit, but like, they're not. Waluigi Stadium. Here's another track that uses those same spectator sprites, but in a much more appropriate way since they are placed much further away from the track. This is a double dash recreation and a very good one at that. That mud texture with the reflective puddles looks really good. I'm also a fan of the alternate paths added above the track. There are two parts where you can jump off a half pipe and onto this metal platform. Nice touch. The use of color here and the overall lighting is very well done. In GameCube and Wii, the overall palette was this dark depressive brown, but now the mud is practically orange. Couple that with the glaring stadium lights and the blue LED strips they've added, and you got a map that gets pretty damn close to the bar set in Base 8. Was it not for the details outside of the track looking a bit basic, you honestly could have fooled me into thinking this was an original track from 8. Hats off for this one. Finally, we have Singapore Singapore Speedway. And if you want to talk about colors, then get a load of this guy. The art direction here is so visually striking. It carries the otherwise flat textures seen in most of the other tour tracks. Usually a map of this scale will have their one like money shot, as I call them. Basically a defined part of the map specifically made to make the players go, damn. Singapore Speedway has like 4. You got this initial cannon blast where you fly on top of this rooftop pool, where you then take a ramp off and then fly over this soccer field. You gotta jump through these rainbow water geysers, this conveyor portion interweaving through these abstract looking buildings, and then this final gliding jump where you fly over like, I mean, just look at all this shit. This map is so frustrating because if it looks this good, I mean, this good with Mario Kart Tour shitty art style with basic ass geometry and textures, then can you just imagine how breathtaking this would look if it had the level of detail seen in the maps in 8? It's a fantastic map nonetheless, but just damn. Also, that music absolutely slaps. I haven't been mentioning it, but there's a lot of bangers here. Base Mario Kart 8 has grander, more organic sounding music tracks, since a lot of the music in 8 has real big band arrangements. You know, that real authentic shit, and you can tell. While the music in Wave 4 Booster Pass is more obviously artificial, as to say, it's clear that most, if not all of it, is emulated instruments via music software. To say there aren't some great songs here would be a flat out lie. And to its credit, in the same way that most people can't tell that Green Greens track from Melee isn't a real recording, the instrumentation in tracks like Bangkok Rush is very convincing. But yeah, that's Booster Course Pass Wave 4. These waves just keep getting better and better, and this time around we get some unbelievable stuff. Unlike the first wave where Switch Brown Nosers were saying those tracks offered an unrivaled experience, even though Wave 1 had some of the most mediocre tracks in all of 8, the stuff here in Wave 4 is unironically some of the best tracks in all of 8. Do they visually look as good as the base 8 stuff? Not quite. But unlike the previous waves, I'm willing to mostly overlook that since not only is this the best looking wave yet, but this stuff is seriously good. Gameplay wise, my biggest critique would still be the pathing on the tour tracks. Even though only one of the maps this time around has a layout that feels unintuitive, that minimap isn't much help in any of the tour tracks, since some genius decided to show the conjoined layout of all laps instead of having an update depending on the lap. While the actual fidelity and attention to detail is obviously better in base 8, the one thing that consistently kept standing out to me the most is the coloring and lighting in Wave 4. It might be some of the best we've seen in all of 8. Like honestly, it's that impressive. The lighting makes both the maps and the characters themselves look super saturated, and I don't mean that in a bad way either. Again, it's really eye-catching. With each wave, I only get more and more excited for what's next, and with the overall quality we've seen in Wave 4, this is probably the most optimistic I've been regarding a booster pass. A far cry from how I felt about it at launch. Anyways, hope you're all enjoying the DLC as well, and I'll catch you in the next one. Hey, thanks for watching. I'd like to give a special thanks to patrons such as Penjester, Some Crazy Idiot, Ian, David Marquesi, All Sun Games, Gameplayer 1500, Kenzo Tien, Drew Kellenberger, David Pacheco, Jeffrey P. Long, Victoria Mars, Amanda Guth, and Rami Batter. Again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.